Morning, everyone. My name is Sherwin Long. I'm head of the TTEITI Secretariat, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I would like to welcome you all to the second webinar in the TTEITI Mining Sector Webinar Series, Digging Deeper, Addressing Mining Sector Challenges in Trinidad and Tobago. We have our chair with us, Mr. Gregory Maguire, who's the chair of the TTEITI Steering Committee. And Mr. Maguire, now I'd like to welcome you to give some welcome remarks. Happy International Women's Day to all.
Pleasant good morning, all participants. Pleasant good morning, showing. And indeed, happy International Women's Day to all the women present. We do have our guest speaker, Dr. Oral Rainford, other members of the Diplomatic Corps, other ministry officials, leaders of captains of industry, members of the TTEITI Steering Committee, members of the media present, students, civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, all good morning. It is indeed my pleasure to deliver the opening remarks in this webinar, focused on mining sector reform. This is the second such webinar in this series that is geared at taking a look at mining sector challenges and proffering solutions. Our goal is to highlight best practice, offering both solutions and a space for dialogue on a sector that has significant strategic value to the country and to the world. Now, this event, of course, comes at a time when global leaders are focusing attention on reducing global warming and climate change and emissions and funding climate change. It comes at a time when we're still reeling and coming out of the after effects of COVID. There's still repercussions of the war in the Soviet Union and the Ukraine. And notwithstanding all these crises, we must not lose sight of the fact that, there is still attention that we must place on the role of mining sector, of mining for rare earth minerals. These minerals are, of course, historically, we know that minerals are extremely valuable from aggregate for construction and road surfacing and so on, straight on to precious metals. Minerals are extremely important. In this era in particular, we find that minerals are critical inputs into some of the emerging renewable energy technologies. So there's that tighter link between the mineral sector and the energy sector. That goes just beyond them being just extractive industries, which of course is our focus. So while we're here in the webinar looking at local and regional issues, it's also an opportune time to reflect on how the mining sector will impact and shape the global future in general. A little bit about TTEITI, and we play a role in raising public awareness and focusing on dialogue and providing recommendations to reform our mining sector. More than ever, transparency on and independent verification of what we earn from our oil, gas, and minerals resources is of paramount importance and should be of paramount importance to every citizen of this country. Today, we focus on minerals and quarrying sector. Let me draw your attention to the fact that TTEITI recently published the State of the Extractive Sectors Report 2022. And this report, we highlight some of the obstacles we as a country must tackle if we are to do better with respect to the management of the resources in the mining and quarrying sector. Some of these challenges include, one, the collecting of unpaid royalties from operators, and which now estimated at around $194 million TT. Developing a system to get more operators licensed. Only an estimated 8 out of an estimated 88 operators actually have license to do the quarrying that they're doing. In that context, the business of quarry rehabilitation and environmental stewardship becomes very much important because unlicensed operators are not necessarily the best at observing standards. And of course, the old bugbear of tackling illegal quarrying remains a very high agenda item. The report also notes that the ministry has taken positive steps to procure drones to help independently verify production in quarries. Now, given these issues, it is important for us to have dialogue on solutions rather than simply highlight these deficiencies, some of which have been going on for decades. These problems and solutions to these problems will take a joint approach. Our aim is to build a bridge for dialogue on necessary reforms. We see part of the reform agenda as involving more and more quarry and mining companies within the TTEITI implementation. Currently, the mining sector is underrepresented in its participation in TTEITI. Only 6 companies of the known companies in the sector currently report to TTEITI. And we deliberately name those companies as Trinidad Lake Asphalt, the National Quarries Company, the EMBD, Hermitage Limestone, FW Hinkson, and TCL. And these are pioneers, and their joining onto the EITI should be applauded. Right? They demonstrate not only their commitment to transparency, but their devotion to good governance and action. And we do hope that more companies follow their lead. Bringing more quarry companies onto the TTEITI reporting protocol will contribute not only to improve transparency and accountability, but would also provide valuable data to help government get a line of sight of the revenues earned from these specific companies and revenues earned from the sector in general. I repeat what I said at our first webinar. This data can be used in many ways. 1, to help develop financial models on expected revenues from the sector. 2, to help guide the reform of any tax policy, regulation, and laws. 3, to help citizens that live in fence-line communities impacted by quarrying to see what is the value of the rehabilitation bonds and how much is paid into the Green Fund and corporation taxes, and how much might be available to support life in their own communities. EITI data provides a platform to help plug a significant leakage of revenues. But more than providing data, we want to drive discourse, want to drive dialogue and debate on the data and the information, and in general on the path of the sector as it makes its contribution to the development of our beloved country. At this session, we'll have frank discussions on reform, by bringing together multiple stakeholders, including citizens, civil society, academia, and the companies. The theme of this webinar is digging deeper, and let this be our mantra as we explore ways to improve quarrying and mining sector management in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to thank you all for coming. I am looking forward to deep engagement and contribution. I always tell people when we attend these things, we must be active participants. It's not just a question of coming to listen, but it's a webinar, and therefore I want to encourage as much dialogue and as much questioning as may be possible. With that said, please enjoy the morning. I'll be here with you throughout, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning again, team. We have a presentation next from the Environmental Management Authority. I'd like to invite Mr. Arnett Jones, who's the Environmental Program Officer, to give us a little feedback as it relates to quarry rehabilitation best practice. Mr. Jones has championed revising and updating the Quarry Rehabilitation Guidebook 2022 as a component of the GEF IWICO project. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Jones to deliver his presentation. Mr. Jones, over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Just give me a moment, let me share my screen. Just a little housekeeping. I'm getting the option that host disabled participant screen sharing. So I could just get that back on, please.
Can you try now, Mr. Jones?
Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good morning, once again. So thanks for the introduction. I am Arnold Jones, Environmental Program Officer at the Environmental Management Unit. I function primarily out of the CEC unit, but sort of been moonlighting and assisting with this project at around a couple of years, and may come into its conclusion a little later this year. So basically, this project and some of the learnings and understanding from the project was what I'm going to present a bit on, so we could better understand in a real world sort of scenario. So marrying both the regulatory bits and some of the experience and lessons learned through the project. So that's going to sort of be the theme and focus this morning. So just a little outline. I'm going to try to share a global perspective with you on the quarry and land degradation. We try to look at a little connection between land management, land degradation, and build on that into looking at some of the focal areas into our recently shared national environmental policy and how some of the facilities put in place to address some of the issues and negative impacts, like you say, related to quarry and sustainable quarrying. Again, some of the regulatory issues and regulating quarry production in quarrying in Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, we're going to just have a look at our quarry rehabilitation guidebook. So this is a guidebook we sort of revamped and try to make it a little more user-friendly, still a work in progress. And I would like to add a little caveat that it focuses a bit more on consolidated material as opposed to some of the hard rock that required blasting and that sort of thing. So it's a bit more focused on the unconsolidated materials as opposed to all. All right, so just we could get a little global perspective on the backdrop. We need to understand our context as SIDS, as small island developing states. In addition to our group in this cohort of 38 member states, but also to understand some of the vulnerabilities associated with SIDS. Supply chain issues or small land area, economies of scale, but also we need to be cognizant of some of the advantages and strengths we have as a SID, our creativity, our capacity to develop novel approaches to adopt innovative and to mitigate the risk of climate change. Because we serve as the vanguard of these things. We're on the front line of it. I had the experience of visiting Grenada some years ago and understood that the severe weather incidents, the impact of Hurricane Ivan recently on their agricultural sector and how some of the innovative ways they took So yes, it's our quarry sector, but similar, we need to adopt that same approach, that same mentality in being novel and innovative in addressing some of our challenges. So quarrying and land degradation. So to understand the broader concept, land degradation impacts soil productivity, vegetation cover, biomass, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. So in other words, our anthropogenic activities, our typical function and activities that we use in our daily practices, some of them may impact our ecosystems and result in land degradation. And to understand some of the contributing factors are mismanagement and overexploitation of our resources, inappropriate agricultural practices, sprawl, urban sprawl, inappropriate waste disposal practice, and mining and quarrying. So also we need to understand the connection and the tie into this. It's not all silos, it's not all unique or individual components of the environment, but the way they're intricately linked, to get that link between our physical environment or natural environment and our human/social environment. Understand how this matrix of components, how they all contribute or may contribute to degrading or impacting our environment and the space that we live in. So to add to that, we need to understand that, and as we touched a bit earlier, that looking at some of the models, if you're familiar with the DPSIR, SIR framework, so we look at some of the drivers. So the drivers that could relate to the biophysical factors, so biophysical factors, how they impact the land, how our activities impact our land space, our land use, how are the inconsistent land uses that are adjacent to each other that would exacerbate the impacts on our receptors. Also institutional factors, and how we govern our land use, how we govern our practices, how we regulate activities on our finite land space, and additionally our socioeconomic component. What are the demands for land? Can we arrange our use of land or in the context of quarrying, can we look at rehabilitating some of these sites post-use to have them beneficial? I mean, with our limited land space, we shouldn't consider abandoned or exhausted quarry lands as a wasteland, but still as a viable asset. So looking at some ways in the rehabilitation concept and how we could bring these lands back into a sustainable type of use. Okay, so now just to look at land management and land degradation globally. Just to understand, we are not unique in this challenge. So globally, over 1.3 billion livelihoods are impacted by degraded agricultural land. So if you understand, in Trinidad and Tobago, the de facto land use for all land is agricultural or conservation. So even in the northeast Trinidad, where we have a lot of, for example, agroforestry, this may impact that sector. So again, we need to look at ways in using this land, scheduling in collaboration with other state agencies like the Forestry Division, for example, in this case, that where coops are to be harvested in the event that there's a follow-up with a mining practice, that we include that into their range plans, into their concept and how they develop. So, and also if you look at the cost of land degradation to SIDS, annually, we see an approximate economic cost of 4.8 billion and in excess of 125 million persons impacted. Also could note the impact on ecosystems. So Jeff highlighting the impact on ecological sustainability, species richness and diversity as a consequence of land degradation. And finally, the vulnerable persons, and particularly the poor. And this has been our experience in particularly some of the fence line communities along some of these quarry sites, and in particular where we worked at national quarries in the Sangre area. And evidence of this was the proportion of female to male, for example. I mean, today's International Women's Day, so that's a critical point we should highlight here as well, that not only economically viable, but opportunities to women, and how this project and how quarry rehabilitation in particular can benefit some of these vulnerable groups, the poor, women, children in particular. How to look at our shop, at the EMA shop, and how we try to approach this as in a broader perspective through the NEP, through the National Environmental Policy. And the NEP sought to address activities such as quarrying through two primary priority areas. One, to sustainably manage the natural resources. So this is not a standalone, but this requires collaboration. This is one, again, as we could go back to the National Quarries example and the experience of this project, the multiple group of stakeholders that were required to successfully execute this project, from EMA as the executing body, to community groups, to civil society organizations such as Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods, the IAM movement. And also, the NEP looked at it in terms of fostering environmental responsible society. So looking at the value of that partnership and that collaboration, not only amongst regulators, the Ministry of Energy, the EMAs, the Commission of State Lands within our landscape, but also the people, the persons, the individuals, the operators, the employees, the fence line communities. So what the NEP also asked for was that not only in terms of looking at best practice, but that we also look at legislative review, look at ways in which we could address licensing issues, issuing of certificate of environmental clearances. What other legislation exists for managing, monitoring effluent and emissions discharged from these facilities? Also looked at improving technical capacity and financial and human capacity. So what's funding, for example, this project into doing research into rehabilitation? What capacity building opportunities there exist? Is there opportunity for training of not only operators, but fence line communities, so they could partner with them to have some agriculture type initiative run on the site? And also to be in line with some of our existing protocols and multilateral agreements, net loss policy, for example. So we removed and devegetated the site. What steps, what interventions are we looking at? So the NEP brought this broader perspective into a holistic look of how we should approach and address and rehabilitate quarry sites. So this brings us to the challenge of unsustainable quarry. As you understand from the chair, Mr. Maguire, this is a critical sector to our economy and our way of life. Construction, for roads, for small and large infrastructure projects. However, where this practice is unsustainable, that's where we can have a few issues. So if we look at the second sentence, we're saying planning and execution of quarrying must be preceded by baseline and impact assessment and the adoption of suitable interventions and mitigation strategies. So not that quarrying be done in such a manner that we have a scarred landscape that we all see when we flying out of Trinidad and we look out that window. It looks, that moonscape, that shouldn't be our image of a sustainable quarry or a well-managed facility, or one that incorporates sustainable development, one that incorporates some best practice and is in line with our legal and regulatory requirements. So to segue onto that point of our legal and regulatory requirements, so in Trinidad, how do we regulate quarries in Trinidad and Tobago? So in terms of legislation policy, we have a few state agencies whose mandate includes managing, monitoring, and even post, from the EMA's perspective, post-CEC, the rehabilitation of some of these sites. So just to list a few, we have the Ministry of Energy. We know with their legislation, even at Section 35, it speaks to the rehabilitation of quarries, not rehabilitation, but the rehabilitation bond, I should say. The EMA, we're familiar with the CEC process, Town and Country Planning Division, Commission of State Lands, Forestry, WASA, to name a few. So we have a mix of state agencies that requires this collaboration, that working together to not only ensure it's a legally and licensed facility, but ensure some of the best practices and some of the degradation are attenuated and mitigated. So at the EMA shop, and the reason why we have this image of the Las Cuevas beach in particular is we need to understand the connection between quarrying and land-based sources of pollution, and the impact of an unsustainable, poorly managed facility on a resource such as this. The UN estimates about approximately 80% of pollution into the coastal environment comes from land-based sources. So assets such as these, valuable assets such as these, we should be rather careful and cognizant of how we manage some of our land-based activities in mind to protect some of these resources. So with that in mind, the EMA has a suite of subsidiary legislation with regards to quarrying, that is the Certificate of Environmental Clearance rules, the noise pollution control rules, the air pollution rules, and the water pollution rules. But next we'll focus a bit more on the CEC rules, however. Sorry, the CEC rules and the CEC designated activities order, and give you a bit, just to run through a bit on the process before we get too much into some of the core rehabilitation, some of the best practices. So if you can see the flow in front of you, the process flow in front of you, and just a quick overview on receipt of the applications, we would screen and process the application, identifying applicable designated activities. So in the case of quarrying, typically designated activity 23 would apply, even though you may have some ancillary activity for clearing of vegetation, removing of trees, site drainage, etc. But the primary activity typical with quarrying is activity 23. If we look at the process flow, we can see a few options. So you can have one option where an EIA is required, a CEC is required, but no EIA is required, where further information is requested. We have a statutory timeline of 30 working days within which to respond to any further information requested and make a determination at that point. Alternatively, if the anticipated impact of your activity is of such significance that an environmental impact is required, this process is a bit more rigorous, and it involves terms of reference being drafted. It provides a facility for applicants to come back to us and engage us regarding some of the contents of that terms of reference to ensure if it's in line with the proposed project. The fees applicable, if I could mention that. So there's a fee at both the application fees and a fee at the EIA terms of reference fees. So if a EIA is required. And that fee, as you can see in the little orange boxes, can range from 5,000 to 600,000, but this is all based on the designated activities that are applicable and the nature and scale of your application. Okay. So that was just a little overview of the CEC process, but not to get too heavily involved in it, because we just want to jump now to have a look at the core rehabilitation guidebook and some of the guidance and best practice that it provides. Okay, so the contents of the core rehabilitation guidebook. So the guidebook, it provides some general information and declaration forms. I'm just like owner, if an agent is going to be pursuing the works or the applications on the applicants or the CAC holders' behalf, it's going to ask you to provide general baseline data, to conduct an impact assessment, to present the rehabilitation concept and some costs, some general costs, as well as guidance on providing maps and other spatial data. So firstly, just in the core rehabilitation process, it's critical for us to understand the lay of the land, pretty much to speak. What's your site? What's around your site? What are the surrounding land uses, activities, etc. So the guide will pretty much ask you in your rehabilitation efforts to give us an idea of what's your land use. Is it agriculture? Is it forestry? Is it residential? Is it mixed use? So we can understand how your idea, how your concept, is it going to be consistent and congruent to neighboring land uses. Also, we'll ask you to give us an idea of whether any infrastructure utility corridors exist. Are there any buried water lines, gas lines that in doing any additional excavation work for your facility, for the rehabilitation of your facility, that can be impacted by the works? Is there a history of contamination of your site? So yes, there was an active quarrying, but is there any portion of the site that was reserved because, for example, there was a history from squatters, let's say, for example, because we know we have this issue with squatting in the Northeast and the Valencia area. But was there like a scrap metal operation? Was there, or is there discarded waste lead acid batteries? Some of these things we've encountered already. So if we're aware upfront within part of your rehabilitation concept, it's not less surprises we will run into later on. Are there any heritage, archaeological, or geologic anomalies exist on your site? We've been to sites where the operators were told us after digging tens of feet under the surface, they found evidence of human occupation, they found bits of fossil fragments. So these sort of things we would like to document and have an idea of. Okay. So not only for your environmental purposes and site preservation purposes, but also for academic purposes. These could provide excellent research opportunities to our educational institutions. And just for example, just so the image we share this up, because the chairman mentioned using unmanned air systems or drones. So it's a bit we've been trying to use not only the project, but going forward and using some of the drone technologies to generate auto mosaics to map and delineate your rehabilitation area. As we'll see later on in the presentation, how this will be useful in monitoring the progress of your rehabilitation effort. So additional, will be asked for flora and fauna, vegetation, wildlife. So in your rehabilitation effort, have you conducted vegetation surveys? Have you identified the presence of endemic, endangered, or culturally sensitive species? Can you give us a statement on species richness, diversity, and abundance? So the ecological component is critical as well, in addition to physical and land use. As the image we share here is, this is a NDVI normalized difference vegetation index. So what we can use with this sort of imagery, again, generated using some post-processing software, but with drone and drone tech, well, US technology. We can use this sort of data, this sort of information to map the progress of your rehabilitation effort. So if you can see from the image, the browns represent some of it, the access roads, and the greens represents where you've seen vegetation starting to flourish. So with this technology, we could over time monitor, be it quarterly, biannually, annually. We can monitor the progression of your rehabilitation efforts. Where even capacity building is going on both sides. So we won't throw this all on the operators, because even on our end, we're trying to build capacity to use the technology, adding some additional post-processing and GIS function to train the software to do 3 counts. So even that sort of thing is possible. But again, this is a learning curve for all of us, and we need to become more efficient in the way we undertake our rehabilitation efforts, incorporating some technological aids into our processes. Additionally, topographic, surface, and groundwater information. We'll ask you for information on terrain, understanding this is a disturbed site. So being disturbed, being that the terrain has been altered, how is this going to impact surface and groundwater resources? Also, how is your operation, or can your operation, or has your operation, can it result in any contamination of these resources? And again, we listed some parameters here. These are parameters that are typically looked at in monitoring surface water issues in the event that there's a discharge from a facility. So we'll ask you to monitor temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, total suspended solids, as some of the parameters that we look at given the nature of the activity. Again, we try and in communication with applicants to tune these parameters, so we don't list parameters and expect it to do testing that given the nature of your operation will not be relevant. More or less. Air quality as well. That you conduct air quality. If you realize we're looking at all components of the environment, the natural, the physical. So we're looking at air quality monitoring as well. That your air quality monitoring is in accordance with our APR, which lists a schedule of how to conduct your monitoring exercise. That you give us spatial data or points where you collected this data. And again, we list some of the parameters typically that we ask for. And again, if you know they're all associated particulates, again, given the nature of the operation and activities at a quarry type facility. We're also asking applicants now, or sorry, CC holders, I should say, in their rehabilitation efforts to assist us in documenting their carbon footprint and the volume of carbon generated at your facility. We understand, again, this is going to help not only the operator, but us in terms of our international commitments. How can we quantify any positive changes in our emissions, in our sequestration in the sector? So we asked applicants to look at their processes, to look at some of the standardized ways that already exist. You have ISO 14064, for example, that allows for some greenhouse gas quantifying. You have life cycle analysis that looks at all components of your facility. There's a little graphic share some of your direct costs, your indirect costs, be it goes even as far as looking at your external travel. If you use air travel, staying at hotels, how you can quantify this and include this in your measurement of your carbon footprint. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list. We're just sharing these examples with you, the life cycle analysis, the ISO standard. Again, the other methodologies exist, but we just ask that you detail these methodologies, that they be appropriate to the type of facility and the operation that you run at the facility. We also ask operators to quantify the type of material that they not only produce as in terms of the commodity, I should say. I just had this little Wentworth scale. It took me back to school many years ago, looking at the coarseness of particles, but also your overburden and the topsoil removed in accessing the material. Describe the material, how you're going to stockpile this material, how you're going to reuse it into rehabilitation efforts. Because again, this topsoil again should be maintained on site, should be kept for replanting, revegetating the site again. We also ask applicants to give us an idea in terms of some of their waste on site. Be it domestic type waste, the paper, glass, organics, etc. In addition to some of the hazardous waste. I know some of these is just a little graphic. Some of these may not be applicable. Again, because we focus on the non-consolidated materials, so not the hard rock type. So some of the explosives, etc., may not be applicable, but just to understand and to appreciate that pesticides, so in this case, your lead acid batteries, so because you have heavy equipment, etc., running on that you operate inside, if you have to change batteries, etc., how you handle, store this material. If you have lubricants, if you have hydraulic fluids, how do you, the volume you have on site, how you store, or if you have to transfer service equipment on the site, what sort of containment and berms you have to limit spills releases into the environment. And so with all some of this background information, you know, land use, your physical space, you know, potential pollutants, or just the baseline information of the site following the quarrying operation, we would finally ask applicants to give us this in a concept. So your rehabilitation guide, your rehabilitation plan should have an overall goal, an overall philosophy, if I could use that word. And we ask that this philosophy be cognizant of your land use, environmental health and safety, considerations, the geologic and hydrologic characteristics, the operational impacts. So what's the nature of the mining of your facility? Would you result with the open pits, risk of slope failure and slumping? Look at some of these things and how you intend to correct some of these issues and impacts. In addition to the revegetation efforts. We need to be mindful as well that rehabilitation may not always be revegetation. The rehab may be for recreational facility. It may be for housing. So our operational impacts and the subsequent land use, which I mean, we look at the first bullet, the subsequent land use, we need some sort of tie-in. It's useful if that tie-in. So in handing over, in passing responsibility to that site to another user, another operator, is safe, sound, and again, as the final bullet says, it adopts the concept of sustainable development or sustainable post-closure uses of the facility. I think, so, and again, and to add to that, rehabilitation, so post-closure cost estimates. Yes, we understand in some instances your cost estimates will be confidential because the CAC process in itself provides that facility. But as best as possible, that we have this cost estimate, and we understand that what your philosophy and your approach is feasible. Well, we cognizant that even the best laid plan doesn't survive contact with reality. So we're mindful of acts of God and what contingency measures you're going to have in place. What measures of insurance for socioeconomic protection, for accidents on your site. look at how does that play in with your bond, the bond as required in the Minerals Act, and how we're going to again. So again, this is something we need to look at. So we need to discuss that this bond doesn't just sit there as a security deposit, but it works. It's functional. That we see is not just left there as a punitive measure, but as an incentive somehow. So how can we work this, the legislative framework that, again, it's not a punitive measure, but an incentive to operators to rehabilitate their site, to bring it back into some sustainable use. Okay. So we will.
Mr. Jones, you have a few. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I'm closing here now. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I'm closing here. So I'm right on time. Yes, so just to close on this, to understand, just to start, the process of mineral extraction and processing involves operations that can have significant negative impacts on the environment. So while these impacts can be minimized, a sustainable balance must be made between quarry activities and the potential impacts on the environment, as mineral resources are a critical contributor to countries' development. Consequently, appropriate interventions and mitigation strategies must be put in place throughout all phases of quarrying. So just to close on that bit, and thank you. I guess I will look forward to your questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Jones, for that presentation. What we will do is we will take one other presentation and then open up for questions on your presentation, as well as the following presentation. I would now like to invite Dr. Rainford, Dr. Oral Rainford. He's the Principal Director of Policy and Planning Division in the Ministry of Transport and Mining in Jamaica. Dr. Rainford is a mining, minerals, energy, education, and sustainable development professional with over 27 years experience in Jamaica's minerals, mining, energy, and education sectors. He has a lot of primary responsibilities, including policy and program development, really also procurement, training opportunities for the sector as well, and particularly the industrial minerals sector. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Rainford to present to us. He will give an overview of the Jamaican quarry and minerals sector. Dr. Rainford is no stranger to the TTEITI. He's come to Trinidad for several of our workshops, and we've also gone to Jamaica as well to meet with him and his team. So without further ado, Dr. Rainford, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Long, and well, other panelists and all parties on this call in this conference. Am I being heard, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. Great. Let me apologize to Mr. Jones, because I know the program would have indicated that I would have been first. We just had a little mix up with the time being where I'm at. So let me apologize for that also. So ladies and gentlemen, Jamaica's mineral sector and overview. I won't say much about myself. By and large, I'm a mining engineer, geologist, with my PhD being in sustainable development. I think I can leave it at that. Mr. Long would have done more than I could in terms of introducing me. No, oh, why doesn't my thing slide? All right. All right. So the segments of my presentation are these. My understanding is that I have 20 minutes. I will try to use them properly. So our mineral sector in Jamaica is dominated by the bauxite and alumina industry. At one time, we were the leading producer of bauxite. We have since slipped to currently about 4th, 5th, and maybe declining. And that is largely based on government policies, especially over the last 5 years. The industry is dominated, the bauxite and alumina industry that is, by multinationals and large entities. Currently, these are Gisco, which is a Chinese outfit. You have United Company Rusal, this is a Russian outfit. There is Concord Resources. Concord is out of the US/UK, and Noble, which is a mix between Asia and Europe. The industry accounts for approximately 82, maybe 85% of, what they control is about 82% of the installed active capacity in terms of the alumina plants. These are some of the proposals which would have been put forward by Gisco some time ago, and they started before the pandemic began to renew the plant, which is the largest alumina plant in the country, and also the only plant that can utilize any type of bauxite that we have, especially the high temperature bauxite. These plans have stalled, and there are different issues afoot. We have, secondly, the precious and base metal industry. Now, this is the least developed segment of the industry. Interestingly, however, there are certain developments which are occurring. Currently, we have no commercial operations. We had a gold mine at Crawl in the parish of Clarendon, and that, when it operated, was deemed to have been one of the richest small gold mines globally, and certainly within the Caribbean, and at least before we would have had the operations over in the Dominican Republic. Importantly, there is ongoing exploration for several of these minerals, gold, copper, and the sweet that comes with that. And interestingly, rare earth elements. And maybe in the next 3 months, if you stay tuned, you might, and be listening to what's happening in Jamaica, you may hear announcements regarding this. So we have 2 companies which are particularly involved. Karube Resources, the one that is really leading as it relates to rare earth metals, is Geophysics Jamaica Limited, which is a local outfit. And they are of the view that they have found at least interesting science. Let me put it that way. Then we have the industrial minerals, and industrial minerals are non-metallic, non-fuel minerals. And so we have a range of these. So you have the limestone, the marble, hard volcanic rocks, shale, pozzolan, etc. There are significant prospects here because in excess of 70% of Jamaica's surface geology is dominated by limestone. Another 20%, somewhere there, is dominated by the volcanics. It is heavily tied to the construction industry. Cement production is a major part of what comes out of this. Lime production also. Lime production is a bit down because of occurrences within the bauxite and alumina industry. Importantly, this segment of our mineral sector is significantly tied, very integrated into the local industry. And we have numerous opportunities for value-added production and import substitution. And this is ongoing. This slide gives you an example, well, it gives you an outline of the location of the bauxite deposits. And you can see they're largely located in the center of the country and trending to the east. It also happens that, especially in the parish of St. Elizabeth, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, there are interesting showings of rare earth elements. It is the case, notwithstanding, that the rare earth elements in Jamaica are associated with the bauxite deposits for one or another reason. That is not the subject of my discussion today, so I won't get into that. Suffice it to say the results appear encouraging. The location of the bauxite alumina works, and especially for those persons who know Jamaica, you have Yorton, Kirkvine, you have Nain, and there is the Jamalco works at Halsall, just outside Maypen, in the parish of Clarendon. So they are primarily inland. The hard volcanic rocks, dotted in the blue, heavy blue, these are primarily dacite, andesite, etc. Basalt, those types of materials. The limestones, primarily in the yellow. So anything you see looking yellow with stripes, those are the limestones, and they are ubiquitous almost. You find them throughout the country. The important part of it, or the more important part of it, is associated with the chemical and the industrial grade materials, and well, chemical and pharmaceutical grade materials. And these are being used in things like antacid. They're being used in aspirin, all sorts of different things. The materials are being used for now. In the at the industrial level, well, I'll have a slide and we can take a look at what some of those are. And this is it. So steel, iron, aluminum smelting, flue gas treatment. We have companies that have won contracts supplying this material, especially into sections of South America, civil engineering, construction, drinking and processing, water, glass, etc., etc., etc. The range of uses is wide, and we do have the materials from the base to the highest quality material that you can think of in terms of purity, very low quantities of heavy metals, etc., very high quantities of calcium carbonate, very high brightness, etc., etc. Now, as it relates to the contribution of the sector to the economy, in terms of mineral rents, we have the bauxite production levy, under which the bauxite levy is collected. We have mineral royalties. We have quarry tax, which is applied to the quarry operations. The mineral royalty is applied to whatever we deem to be a mineral. And it is not, the definition of mineral does not necessarily coincide with the geological definition. It's more an economic. Annual earnings now, just about $1.2 billion overall. And that is in terms of what the government makes. It accounts for approximately 2% of our GDP, but this is down from 10–12% several years back. In part, this has to do with a shrinkage, a reduction in output, etc., but also due to expansion in other areas of the economy. The sector accounts for over 55% of the value of our exports, and over 85% of the value of what we deem the traditional exports. So when you talk about the agricultural products, etc., those things coming from the colonial economy, bauxite alumina would account for 85% of those outputs. It provides comparatively high-paying jobs, especially within the bauxite and alumina industry and the cement manufacturing industry, the lime manufacturing industry. It employs some of the most technically skilled and trained persons in the country. Importantly, also, given that the operations are located in rural and semi-rural areas, which are dominated either by agriculture and or, well, tourism is really further down the list, but generally them dominated by agriculture. The result in terms of the earnings is really massive for these communities. Over the last 6 years, there has been a significant degree of environmental activism in Jamaica. And this has resulted in some serious problems for the government. Some 5 years ago, the government would have granted a special mining lease 173, SML 173, to a company at the time called Dada Holdings. Now, 2 years ago, a local grouping, challenged the issuing of this permit, which was cleared by the Environmental Protection Agency and all the entities. The matter went to court, and there has been a ruling which has resulted in the entity not being able to undertake any mining in the area. And of course, this has caused significant problem, and there is an appeal. And this is just one of several cases. Additionally, there were complaints to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights relating to or suggesting that there were numerous abuses committed against Afro-descendant Afro-Jamaicans and Maroons, etc. Of course, the government has rubbished these claims because these things are just, they're not true. There are problems, of course, in terms of dusting and these things, but it's not as if these things have gone unabated. We have a robust system that responds to these concerns. But notwithstanding that, persons have seen it fit to bring these cases, and the cases are being heard. And let us see how further we go. Another part of the impact or the impacts of these charges and these cases are significant delays in investment in the bauxite industry, negative local and international media attention. And there are also now, at least in the minds of several investors, doubt as to where the government of Jamaica stands vis-a-vis the industry and its future. This picture gives you a good idea of what the Jamaican landscape looks like. And this would be a typical, well, let me not say a typical, because this really would be one of the larger limestone quarrying operations. Now, given that we have hills, and I would have heard part of what Mr. Jones had said earlier, these hills are quite vegetated, green. The limestone is white. When that material, when the areas are cleared and the material is cut, you are going to see this bright material. The scar is going to be there. And the vast majority of the limestone operations are on hillsides or on hills, because that is where we generally mine. Normally, the GOJ does not allow for mining below the road, below the surface of the road, for a range of reasons, some of which I don't share. But this is what the situation is. Just to give an overview of some investment opportunities within the Jamaican space: transport and storage in mining, port construction, storage, etc. electricity generation, especially renewables, waste management. You have consultancy services, exploration, you have health and safety, that's a big area. Value-added production, etc., etc. I think that is the extent of the presentation. I think it might be better to take the calls. Hopefully, I have not exceeded the time that has been allocated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rainford. Very interesting presentation. What we will do now, we will pause and have a few questions from the participants. I see there's a Q&A box that you can send your questions to us. If you have any questions for Mr. Jones as well as Dr. Rainford, please don't hesitate. Just to kick off the Q&A, Dr. Rainford, you mentioned bauxite, right? But I wanted to find out about rare earth minerals in Jamaica, and if this is something that you're looking at as well.
It is an area that Geophysics Jamaica Limited, a local outfit, is looking at very seriously, and it has made certain claims based on geophysical work, drilling work that it has executed over the last 2 years, and which are ongoing, to the point that the Minister of Mining has seen it fit to give them certain lands which were previously held by another entity. That doesn't have anything to do with rare earth, but considered quite important to the economy. And that gives an indication of the pivoting that the government thinks is necessary, and part of the diversification, continued diversification of the mineral sector that our national mineral policy deems to be important. So this is, it is fairly serious, but we are waiting to see more of the results. So yes, it is ongoing. And the indications, speaking with one of the principals here at a conference for exploration and development in Toronto, speaking with that individual yesterday, the indications were that most of what they have found, or a significant amount of what they have found, are associated with the heavier type, or the heavier elements within that suite of rare earth metals.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rainford. I see we have another question from the audience. What type of rehabilitation is done in Jamaica? And do you have any challenges with illegal quarrying?
All right. Let me answer the illegal part first. We do have challenges with illegal quarrying, but it ebbs and flows. And currently the problem is not as significant as it would have been, say, 20 years ago. And largely it's confined to riverine operations, sand and gravel. So yes, but it's no, not a major problem. Now, the problem, however, is such that once there is a report, either the police will get involved, or the mining operators, well, the mining inspectors and the mining operators themselves will get involved to try and stamp out the process. Certainly, my office is involved in that. NEPA, the National Environment and Planning Agency, it too is involved in trying to stem this sort of behavior. With respect to rehabilitation, we rehabilitate for several purposes. One, reforestation, 2, industrial and residential purposes. So we have, for anyone who knows Portmore, Jamaica, and especially the Nago's Head region, we have an entire area, and that would now be about maybe 40, 50 hectares, I believe. And all of that area would have been a quarry some time ago, and now it's covered in plazas and all sorts of shops. Immediately to the west of that is an area called Marine Park, which is a fairly large gated and regular community on benches. And that covers maybe another 150 hectares of land. And all of that, or those areas, would have been quarried 40, 50 years ago, and maybe up to 35 years ago, and would have been rehabilitated and are now successfully occupied by other land uses. So we have, and we try to hold to the principle of sequential land use planning and ensuring that the lands are properly utilized. Now, in the bauxite industry, because the material is generally contained within cavities, what you have are bowls. What you have are bowls, so to speak, craters. Once you have removed the bauxite, we have sought to use some of those for water catchment after we would have reprofiled, sealed them, etc., etc. The vast majority have been repurposed for agriculture, reforested where that is possible. Some, but very few, have been used for waste reception. So the National Solid Waste Management Authority, to the best of my knowledge, has repurposed 2 of these facilities, one in the parish of, well, one in Manchester and the other in the parish of St. Anne. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Rainford. I see we have some questions here for Mr. Jones. One question is, mine design is important in quarrying as it highlights how the deposit is to be extracted, the economic limit of the quarry, and will guide into what rehabilitation strategies are to be used to restore previously quarried lands. Our examples of rehabilitation are often reforestation and revegetating previously quarried areas. However, what examples for rehabilitation are there for quarries where pit depths are over 50 meters?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. So thanks for the question. Interesting one, particularly because the guideline limits mining to 10 meters or 30 feet. So an example of depths at 50 meters is going to be pretty challenging to give you an example in a Trinidad, at least from a legal quarry or one that I've visited in a Trinidad context. So I hope that answers that bit of the question. Maybe if I could share. So just on the idea of the mine design plan, yes, I agreed. But this bit was just a focus on the rehabilitation bit of it. And it was done in a way that, because over years we encountered issues with operators and applicants having challenges in preparing that rehabilitation plans, that last bit of it. So from our shop, within the remit of our legislation, the Environmental Management Act, the CEC rules, water pollution rules, depending on the nature of the operation, the CEC would form part and provide some of the guidelines and stipulate how you operate the quarry. Not as a mine design plan per se, as that more sits with the Ministry of Energy, And again, on the final bit, the depth, I mean, the best of my recollection would be 10 meters or the 30 feet. So we wouldn't typically have quarries at depth at 50 meters in Trinidad. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We have a question regarding the guidebook and whether or not it's available to the public.
Yeah, with the guidebook, we have the point now when an advanced draft has been prepared. So it's just a bit of little editing, graphic work and that sort of thing. And yes, it's going to be made available to the public.
There's a question here related to the EMA's presentations focuses very much on entities that request application for CC for mining, or the entities that are registered. The impact of the 83 unregistered entities far outweigh the 5 registered entities. What is the EMA's role in ensuring that these entities fall in line with the standards set out by the EMA, being mindful that these entities are critical in supplying the demand for aggregates that they produce?
Hi. Thanks for that one. Yes, we acknowledge there's a challenge. Maybe just to differentiate, because I'm better placed to speak within issues within our legal framework. So if in terms of quarry license, so we know there's, to my knowledge, because I'm not too familiar with their process, a mining license has a finite life. I think it's 5-year life on a mining license. I'm open for correction if I'm incorrect there. So it's a 5-year life. CEC, so which is from our shop, has a lifetime once works exists, so is valid once works have commenced within a 3-year period. So the legislation, again, this, if I could use this, there's a bit of a gap in the legislation when an overlap would have been preferred. So you can have a valid CEC and an expired mining license. So that's an interesting dynamic. I can't explain why, but as it exists before us. And yes, we appreciate that some of these unregistered, as it was framed here, or unlicensed or unregulated quarries have issues. And we lean on our, from the EMA side, we lean on our our environmental response unit. I would blaze out, I mean, one of my colleagues is sitting in as well, Mr. Malwin Alexander. He's sitting in as well to understand some of the challenges that we have to be encounter in dealing with some of the illegal quarries. And as Mr. Maguire said earlier, yes, we have started using, we have to use some of the technology. You have to use drone technology. One, because of the safety. Illegal quarrying could be a no man's land. It could be a violent and rugged place out there. So we have to think of our safety and try to use some of the technology. So that's some of the best ways thus far, knowing the nature of the sector, how we can get in there and be safe for ourselves as well while doing our jobs.
Thank you. I see we have members of the press here. I see Joel Brown and Clint Chantak. Allow you to ask your questions, Mr. Brown and Mr. Chantak. I see Mr. Brown, you're going first.
Right, good day. Just to follow up on what would have just been said, I'm wondering in terms of what you had identified in terms of, let's say, the legislation or the gap, what is being done to address that gap? Because it is quite interesting, to say the least, that you could have operation with a license or permit on one end, but also have an expired document or permit on the other end. And secondly, can unlicensed quarries or unregistered quarries or so on, is there a process, or can there be a process by which they could be allowed to meet the requirements so that they can be registered and fall under the framework?
Yes, I'll take that one again. So to take the second bit, yes, the facility exists for operators to come in. So be it through the CEC process, where we even have the pre-applications, we could talk to the applicants all the way through the process, assist and guide and facilitate them into being a regulated facility. In terms of the gap, I mean, that's my observation on it. And I won't want to speak too much in terms of reforming legislation to close that gap. But the CEC process, I mean, I could speak to EMA's role, and in particular, the CEC process, while not a catch-all, at least can provide some bit of a safety net in terms of, because environmental management is holistic. It should consider all components: the physical, the social, the natural / ecological. So where, I mean, because we don't want to dwell too much or pass the baton on to our colleagues at the Ministry of Energy. But what we can do at our shop is incorporate some of the same best practices with the guidebook. So we could add different tools and guides and training and BMPs that could supplement this where there's any gap or deficiency, without trying to be the catch-all for every violation, breach, or oversight by operator. I hope that helps a bit in terms of the question.
It does. Now, just one other thing at this time, just in terms of environmental impact. I know you would have gone at some length earlier, but I'm just wondering, is it a sustainable sector? It meets a particular demand which is needed for construction and so on, as you would have pointed out. But the balance in terms of the protection of the environment, is that balance difficult or as difficult as it would have been in the early days? Is it becoming less difficult with technology?
I wouldn't say more or less difficult, because then we'll have to look at supply and demand for the commodity and that end of it. But what I can say from my experience here has been, and as the colleague from Jamaica shared as well, because of that increase in environmental consciousness, our eyes and ears are the public. So we rely and depend on them to raise these flags for us. So that in itself has helped with our monitoring, has helped with our identifying of breaches and violations. So I would say, yes, the technology, we can use the drone technology, cell phones being more available, the WhatsApps and that sort of thing. We have our environmental hotline that members of the public can call into confidentially and give us this, and will share information with us with regards to any breaches or violations. So yes, the demand from the sector has grown, and we could, the indicators are before us. We could see with the increase in illegal quarrying, well, the observed increase in illegal quarrying, but again, on the flip side, a more active and vibrant and participatory population helps us to counter that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a million for the questions, team. I see Talia Mohammed has her hand up. We'll allow her to ask a question. Talia.
Are you all hearing me? Good morning
Yes,
still. My question is a more generalized question. We understand there's a lot of challenges within this industry, and there may be, challenges with unregulated persons just not fully understanding the needs of compliance. Would you all consider bringing together a task force from all the agencies that are supposed to be involved with regard to managing registering and oversight on quarrying, to kind of bring more education to the sector? I understand, I'm in this field and I didn't even realize that the EMA had this anonymous tip line until last year while doing some M&E reporting on the TCL project. So do you think that the agencies that are involved have a primary responsibility to do more education, just the general public, on the ability to tip anonymously, firstly, and secondly, to come together in some sort of team approach with all the multi-stakeholders to kind of combat these problems? And as we know from all the TTI reports, there's economic losses happening and there's violence and crime associated. And there's a lot more technology now to manage and oversee. So I would encourage some sort of communication and working relationships on that. Or is it possible? I should ask, is it possible? Thank you.
Would you like me to take that one again?
Sure, sure.
Yes, Miss, I didn't get the name, sorry, Miss Tyler Mohammed. Yes, Miss Mohammed. Yes, firstly with the public education and awareness, there could be no challenge to that. I mean, even just to use the projects, I just want to keep it within this box. That was a major component of the project, the public awareness. There were several documentaries produced. Even there's a partnership with Canary that produced a documentary. IWEEK was producing a documentary as well. So public awareness is a critical component of the project and is valuable because being unaware of the hotlines until last year, I mean, that's maybe one I need to take back to our house and discuss, and somehow we could get that information out, because if a resource like that remains hidden, then we sort of defeating the purpose. Collaboration, definitely. I mean, I will endorse that 100%. We've had attempts, I would say. I sat for a time on the environmental multi-stakeholder group, which serve under the TTEITI. So we do try at various levels to get that collaboration going. We know the value of participatory processes and stakeholder participation in these efforts. So again, I mean, these are things I would say we need to work on. I won't say we've done and have it covered, but these are something we need to work on, and again, be open to comments on and how we could better get this platform out and create a platform that's accessible and accessible to all, that can share and contribute into our country, into the sustainable and economic development of our country. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jones. What we'll do here now, we will just pause questions for a bit. We'll go to our final presentation. So I would now like to invite Dr. Carlton Roberts to highlight a core rehabilitation case study. Dr. Roberts' degrees in plant science from the University of the West Indies. He's also a lecturer in Caribbean island ecology and biodiversity conservation. He recently provided technical oversight on a rehabilitation of abandoned quarry sites in Northeast Trinidad under the IWEEK program. He has over 40 years experience working in the field of forestry and retired as the Deputy Conservator of Forests. So I'd now like Dr. Roberts, representing Shastras, to give us this local case study so we can see what has been done in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to rehabilitation and learn some lessons from that as well. Dr. Roberts, I'd like to invite you to present. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Long, and thank you, the organizers, for inviting us from Shastras to present this case study. As was said before, that we did a rehabilitation project under the auspices of the Integrated Water, Land, and Ecosystem Management in the Caribbean for Small Island Developing States. And it was funded by the Jeff Small Grants Program. And it was located at the National Quarries Company Limited compound at Toure in Sangre Grande. The project aimed at revegetating areas of abandoned quarry pits so that vegetation can be reestablished to provide ecological functions. We are mindful that when the vegetation is extracted, or when the minerals are extracted, the vegetation goes down and it would be permanently altered. So rehabilitation work is an effort to put back vegetation in the area so that a self-sustaining ecosystem can be re-established. But before we do that, we need to understand what this land degradation idea is all about, which is as a result of mineral extraction. The other two presented showed that the importance of the mineral extraction to the economy, to Jamaica, to Trinidad and Tobago. They also agree that it's necessary to rehabilitate after extraction. So we found out that land degradation really loses is when biological productivity is lost, where the biota of the area is diminished. After mineral extraction, there is also loss of ecological integrity. That is lowering the ability of an ecological system to support itself. And there's another loss as a result of removing the biota. That is the loss of values to human being. And as you know, the biodiversity or the biota of an area provides tangible values, tangible products, and intangible values. We can talk about them later. So there was a strategic approach to this whole idea of rehabilitation. And we had to involve key stakeholders. And our primary stakeholder would have been the EMA and the GEF. And they provided the oversight and the coordination and the financing. We also had relationship with the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation that provided a gateway into the community. Our primary relationship was with the national quarries that identified the sites and provided transport and safety. Now, the community people. It is on record that any rehabilitation program stands the chance of success if community people are involved. So there was the attempt, or we tried as much as possible to engage the members of the community who are affected by the floods and the dust pollution and all the other negatives as a result of this removal of vegetation from that Toure Valencia area. Unfortunately, there was a group of people coming out of the community that they show ownership to the project and they use it as a source of livelihoods. Another thing about the group of people would be the social inclusion. It was almost 80 or 90% women. We had quite a number of youths, and we had a few people who were differently abled. So it was all inclusive. We use the ecological restoration approach, and as you would know that this is a decade of ecosystem restoration. And in this approach, there are three methods of approach. We have the maximum diversity method, there is the natural regeneration method, and there's the framework species method. The one that was chosen, or the one that was applicable to this situation, was the maximum diversity method, which means planting a wide variety of trees with a variety of successional stage trees, putting more of the later succession species in the mix. We provided the necessary conditions for successful establishment. We had to do frequent tending to reduce weed competition. And the idea is to establish a closed canopy at the earliest possible opportunity. Now, this group of people from the community, it was necessary to spend time with them, understanding why we are doing what we want to do. Help them understand the importance of trees and forests. Let them understand what is land degradation. Help them understand what is biodiversity conservation and what are some of the environmental issues that we face. So we had a full package of theoretical training for these community people. And we have prepared a handbook, a training the trainer's handbook that covers all the whole course content that these individuals participated in. So in addition to the classroom training, they were exposed to training in the field. And it's in their training in the field, we actually brought into effect the rehabilitation work. So they are trained and they master the technique of tree planting and maintenance. They master the technique of nursery production. They master the techniques of developing check dams and fire traces. And they were exposed to establishing the vetiver system. And I must say that another NGO was on the project that was responsible for the vetiver system, and that is the IAM movement. We exposed the participants to assessing an area of natural forest, the tree diversity within that natural forest. So we went in with them and gave them the opportunity to learn species, understand the demography in that, what part of the layer, what layer different species occupy, and so on. They also got a taste of using the GPS. So we were talking about planting a whole lot of species. Going back to assessing the tree diversity in the natural forest, we found about 20 species in the natural forest. And we really planted more than 25 species. And we had species that were hardwood species that would make timber trees. Then we had species for aesthetics that would beautify the place. And we had trees that were deliberately put in to encourage fauna, to encourage wild animals to come back in the denuded area. So, site selection. We selected 3 sites because of the varying characteristics. The first site was one with deep topsoil, combat beds, residue of organic material, irrigation ponds, and that area was previously used for production of agriculture crops. In that area, we were able to plant, along with the forest trees, plant agriculture crops, a system that is named the Tongia system, where you plant agriculture crops along with your forest crop, so that when you're cleaning the agriculture crop, you inadvertently clean the forest crop and give the forest crop a chance of survival. And when you fertilize the agriculture crop, the fertilizer seeps to the roots of the forest crop. The second site was a site with loose sand, no topsoil. It was previously a site for reforestation, and that reforestation attempt, well, more or less failed. And as a result of the failure, we decided we could, when we're planting, we'll put pen manure at the spots of planting the trees. The other site also, no topsoil, but it was a compacted gravel, a layer of compacted gravel. It was also previously there was a previous attempt at reforestation, and the trees, they really struggled. We used pen manure again at that planting site. So let's see what happened after 4 years. In plot 1 with the deep soil, after 4 years, we had trees that we planted reaching a maximum of 12 meters, close to 36 to 40 feet. The average tree height was 8 meters. In plot 2 and 3, however, you see the slow rate of growth and the low maximum height. So the question can be asked, what can we do to improve sites like site 2 and 3? And these sites are typical of sites that we would find on most quarries, needing rehabilitation. So our first recommendation is to bring in tons and tons of topsoil. And I heard Mr. Jones talk about the requirement to stockpile your topsoil when you are about to do an excavation. That topsoil is to be brought to the area for revegetation or rehabilitation. We also recommend covering that topsoil or mixing into the topsoil tons of organic matter, trimmings from CPEP cleaning the road. If we can collect all of that and put them there, sargassum, seaweed, spent grain from the Carib factory, pen manure, and sawmill, sawdust from the sawmill. If we can put all of that, we would be making a soil, creating soil conditions necessary for plant growth. Application of fertilizer is another one. And think in terms of irrigating during the dry season. I must say, this is a tall order. Many people try just going and planting trees on an area because it's clear. And after 2-3 years, the trees die. This is a must in the planning. That pre-planting preparation is a must. Let's go back to plot 1. These are pictures of the trees that have reached, in 4 years, they have reached 12, 10 and 12 meters high. Their crowns are touching and they are forming a canopy. Once the canopy is formed, ecological services begin. They start flowering. The pollinators come in. They provide protection to the ground, so there will be little or no soil erosion. When the leaves drop, they fall to the ground and decompose, so we start nutrient cycling, and so on and so on. So the benefits of a restored ecosystem, we are talking about maximum diversity among and within species and vegetation type, functioning of species for the long-term viability of the ecosystem, and full manifestation of ecological processes, ecological and evolutionary processes. This is what we want. This is what plot 1 would offer at this point in time. We are not sure how long plots 2 and 3 would take to reach this stage, but plot 1 is well on the way. So where do we go from here? Knowledge transfer. This operation has been repeated in 2 other quarries. At the Carib Glass Works in Matura, we have done some planting in an abandoned quarry. At TCL Limestone Quarry in Mayo, we have also done some plantings there. We are now in the process of evaluating their survival rate and their growth rates and so on. This cohort of quarry rehab champs, as we call them, they are ready to do rehabilitation projects on a national scale. We are thinking of replicating the training. There's potential for training other cohorts in other locations. We are also thinking of having the training program certified or accredited so that people can receive certificates with which they can find jobs elsewhere. We are thinking of doing a few scientific papers from the exercise. We are also thinking about how do we do a cost, benefit cost analysis of that rehabilitation. How much does it actually cost? We are recommending that there should be oversight, real oversight, and Mr. Jones spoke about it, where there would be legislative and incentive and penalties to encourage people to do rehabilitation. There is a rehabilitation guidebook, and that should be fully utilized. We are suggesting that there should be the rehabilitation exercise should be sustainable. Do it in such a way that you can generate some income from it. And the income can be plugged in to further or rehabilitating a wider area. Then sustainable livelihoods, the participants have now formed themselves into a company, and they are working along with other private sector people to exercise their knowledge in order to keep income sustainable. And we are suggesting that there should be a simplified version of financial mechanisms to encourage community groups to get involved in these rehabilitation projects. And we are asking for support for community groups, continue to support community groups in reforestation. There is a national reforestation program that came out of the Forestry Division, and we are suggesting that more community groups be allowed to participate in such. And I think there is as far as our thoughts go for now. So thank you very much, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much for that enlightening presentation, Dr. Roberts. I will turn it over to the participants now. If you have any questions, please type it in the box. There was a question before, I believe, I'm not sure if he or she is still here from Mineral Mines. We could allow you to ask your questions. If not, if that person is not there, I see there are some questions from the floor in terms of restoration. So Dr. Roberts, I believe this is for you. How can we really introduce more plant and more animal species into the restoration ecosystems, both plants and aquatic?
All right, let's deal with the aquatic. The aquatic angle is one other option in restoration. So you can do restoration by what we did, reforestation and revegetation. You can do it in changing the landscape, changing the land use into housing development. You can do aquatics. What do you call it? Aquaculture. You can do aquaculture. So there is that possibility. To what extent it has been explored in Trinidad and Tobago, I'm not sure, because I knew that before we came in some years ago, there was an experiment with aquaponics. The results of that I do not have at hand. But using those pits filled with water as areas for production of tilapia and so on, I think it's a brilliant idea. The next thing is the revegetation, as many species as possible. Well, with the caveat that some species grow better in different soil type, different environmental conditions. So it would be necessary to do that diversity analysis that we did, go over in a plot of natural forest, use it as a proxy to say, well, look, if this is here, maybe the entire area would have been covered with this type of forest, with this species diversity, and take as many as is possible and plant them in the restoration effort. Now, for maximum diversity, it is necessary for you to develop your own nursery. The Forestry Division has a nursery. They gave us some plants to do some initial planting, but we developed a nursery that had the capacity of producing 10,000 seedlings. We went into the forest and took out what is called wildings, seedlings of wild species, seedlings of olive, robel, what have you. Take them out, bring them in the nursery, pot them, grow them to large enough size, harden them, and get them ready for the field. So as many species as possible, we can produce in the nursery with the sole purpose of doing restoration work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I'll just go through the questions here. So there was a question from a quarry operator to Mr. Jones. For an operator that has a quarry management plan and rehabilitation bond in place already, would this guidebook affect these existing documents?
Hi, good afternoon. It shouldn't. Again, as the title says, it's a guidebook. So once it's, and again, it's not publicly available yet. So once it becomes publicly available, I mean, it would be useful just to have it as a consideration. So I wouldn't say it would relegate your existing plan to be null and void, but it should be used as a complementary tool to fill any gaps, any area that will be deficient in your current plan, or to bolster it and ensure its effectiveness, that sort of thing. Thanks.
Thank you. There's another question here for you, Dr. Roberts. Are you aware of any successful agricultural model, crop-based, that has been achieved as part of the rehabilitation sustainable efforts? I believe you gave some examples in your presentation, but probably if you could expand on it a bit.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I forgot to list agriculture as one of the options also. And at National Quarries, we found out that they had used agriculture as a first option. They planted bananas, some citrus, banana planting and citrus. They also planted pumpkins and other short crop. I have no idea why the system did not continue, but they left that piece of land where they used for planting, and that's the plot one that did well in forest restoration. The one that the trees grew best, and it is now covered with forest trees. So yes, agriculture is another option, knowing that the land was depleted of nutrients. So the same prior planting operations that I mentioned for plot 2 and 3, you had to do it. Put back the topsoil, bring in pen manure and other organic stuff, do your irrigation, and it can successfully do an agriculture crop that can make money.
Thanks, Dr. Roberts. I see one more question coming in here. Question actually congratulates you and your team. And they wanted to know, how can regulatory support and licensing support rehabilitation? What other types of uses for the rehabilitated quarries besides agroforestry that can add economic value?
Well, as I mentioned, when you do your site assessment, if the place is good for, let's say, housing, that's an option. If it's good for aquaculture, that's an option. So in the rehabilitation plan, the individual operator would know what suits the site best. Maybe they would need some consultation with an expert or something like that. What suits the site best? Another one would be recreation. Another option could be recreation. So instead of trying to invest in all of this, make some bike trails or do pastures and do horseback riding and so on. The options are limitless, but they must be done in a systematic way, a regulated way. And the land would be restored to some level of land use that can facilitate ecosystem restoration.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Roberts. I don't see any more questions coming in here for the panel. And it's 12:32 now. So again, I would like to wrap up this session, but I'd like to give special thanks to today's speakers who voluntarily agreed to participate in this session from both in Trinidad and elsewhere as well, in terms of Dr. Rainford is not even in Jamaica. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for highlighting the core rehabilitation guidelines of the EMA. Dr. Rainford, thank you for giving us a flavor of what is happening in Jamaica, some of the possibilities there as well, and some of the challenges that you face in terms of the mining sector. Dr. Roberts, thank you as well for highlighting a real community project and bringing a sort of a human face to these issues. We normally talk about them in a broader perspective, but these quarry rehabilitation is a human issue. It impacts the lives of citizens. So thank you for bringing that perspective. I'd also like to thank the media who continue to be supportive in providing the public with information on the EITI. I'd like to thank the Secretariat, the TTEITI Secretariat, for working tirelessly behind the scenes for helping ensure this workshop series got off the ground. I'd like to thank Gabrielle Rawlings, Deandra Grandison, Alyssa Dionan, and Verena Passad. I'd also like to thank our communication agency, Yellow House Media, and Kerry Peters for their role in facilitating this as well. Last but not least, I'd like to thank you participants for staying the course, for engaging with us and making this a very interactive session. That brings us to the end of today's formal proceedings. We definitely have the recording available on our website. And I want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to attend this webinar. And please keep safe. Goodbye to all.